is African American civil rights leaders, um, and leaders essay plan. So first, there's Asa Philip Randolph, who was alive between 1889 and 1979. Uh, his views and kind of a bit of background. 1912, his was sort of his first bit of activism. He was 23 years old, and he created the Employment Agency for Black Workers. In 1917, him and Chancellor Owen founded the Messenger, which they called economically secure and politically free um, kind of newspaper. His achievements. In 1925, he created the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was the first black union. In 1941, he helped push for the Executive Order 8802 with FDR, which um, prohibited discrimination in the nation's defense industries and set up the Fair Employment Practice Committee. In 1948, he helped push for the Executive Order 9981, which led to the desegregation of the army during the Korean War. Between 1960 and 1966, he created the Negro American Labor Council advocacy group for black workers' civil rights. This group was later accused of communism. In 1963, he held the March on Washington. His weaknesses include he was slow to take action, arguably, and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters could not protect people against surges of unemployment in 1925. His overall impact. He used his position in America, because he came from a rich family, to help black workers. He was a principled organizer and speaker at the March on Washington. He collaborated with JFK and FDR to push Congress. Well, he collaborated with JFK and FDR for civil rights legislation. With JFK, he pushed for Congress to strengthen the Civil Rights Bill. He was presented with the Medal of Freedoms by Lyndon B. Johnson. He founded the Philip Randolph Institute, which studied the root causes of poverty among African Americans. Then we have Booker T. Washington. He was before Asa Philip Randolph, and he was around 1856 to 1915. His kind of views and a bit of background. He believed that the development of morality in black communities was necessary, and he took quite a pragmatic, almost conservative approach to civil rights as an ex-slave. His achievements include, in 1881, alongside Samuel Armstrong, Washington founded the Tuskegee Institute, which became the head of, and then he became the head of the school. In 1901, he created the National Negro Business League in response to the Jim Crow laws, as well as building more schools and newspapers. In 1901, he was invited by FDR to the White House to consult him on racial matters. And his autobiography, Up From Slavery, details his personal successes. In 1895, he did his Atlanta Compromise speech, which was the first speech given to a racially mixed audience in the South. He spoke on gaining the respect of white America and being given full citizenship as sort of the plight of civil rights at the time. His weaknesses were many believed he accepted the ideas of white supremacy. He didn't challenge the lynching mentality. He played down often the importance of the vote, and he lacked popular support from African Americans. His overall impact was no tangible change in civil rights legislation, which was bad, a pragmatic approach to education and economic prosperity for black people, which was positive, a lack of radicalization for more civil rights, which was bad, but arguably he helped ease whites into the ideas of the civil rights to come, which was a big positive. Then we have W.E.B. Du Bois, who was around 1868 to 1963. His views and background is he was the first African American to acquire a PhD from Harvard. He was a professor at various universities. He opposed Booker T. Washington's view that African Americans should be passive in their roles. He believed in fighting for equal rights. He saw, in his own personal life, he saw the knuckles of Sam Jose, who was a lynched man, on sale in a shop window, which really tore him up because it was quite a big deal. He believed in establishing a liberal black elite for leadership. In terms of his achievements, in 1899, he published the Philadelphia Negro, in which he referred to the talented tenth of black men who he said could be leaders to form his sort of liberal black elite. He was the editor of the Journal, which advocated for cultural nationalism in the black community. In 1903, he created an organization called the Souls of Black Folk, which increased popularity for black nationalist movements and laid out the founding principles of the NAACP. He organized protest marches in New York in reaction to Washington's inaction over the East St. Louis riots in 1917. And before his death, in his later life, he was involved in the March for Jobs and Freedom. In terms of his weaknesses, he opposed working with Booker T. Washington. In 1934, he was removed from the NAACP for advocating black autonomy and non-discriminatory segregation. He didn't keep his radical views a secret, which would have helped him, and he was eventually silenced by McCarthy's Red Scare in his later civil rights career. In terms of his overall impact, he helped change the mindsets of those in power, which was good. He used black nationalism to actively fight for civil rights, which was good. He set the way for radicals who pushed for and actively changed legislation in the 1960s, which was good. And it's fair to say he definitely deserves credit as sort of like an ideological thinker. Then we have Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who sort of come as a pair, and they both of them together lived between 1966 and 1982. They were the founders of the Black Panther Party, which goal was to end the white capitalist control and police brutality. They were influenced by Malcolm X and the Black Power movement. They were influenced by Marxism and Maoism, and they were in favor of armed self-defense. Their achievements were that they were able to reassert the ideas of black pride. They created the 10-point program for change. They ensured the safety of African Americans in certain areas. They set up breakfast clubs for poor black children in areas They set up breakfast clubs for black children in which men, as part of a purposeful gender role reversal, prepared the food. And this was based on the Marxist program created by Mao. The Maoist program created by Mao to serve the people. In terms of their weaknesses, many saw these groups as a means to inflame the white supremacy, and militancy and violence of the Black Power and movements put white people off the idea of civil rights. And then, in terms of the overall impact, their party was ruthlessly hounded by the FBI, so in their later careers they weren't able to do much, which was bad. The leaders, such as Fred Hampton, were murdered by the police, which was bad, but arguably good for civil rights because it brought attention to police brutality. The torture of Alex Rackley and Betty Van Patter vastly damaged the image of the Black Panthers, and they helped communities economically and socially, especially in the poorest areas, which was definitely good. Then we have the other civil rights leaders. Firstly, we'll do Malcolm X, who lived between 1925 and 1965. His views were that desegregation and voting rights were non-essential to civil rights. He focused on economic and social conditions that African Americans suffered in inner cities. He believed that whites would always be hostile to black people, and as such, rejected integration and the banning of segregation. In terms of his achievements, he was an influential member of the Nation of Islam group and promoted their drug rehabilitation process. In 1963, the New York Times states he was the second most sought-after public speaker in the US. He was able to convert Cassius Clay to Islam, who then changed his name to Muhammad Ali, and he did his ballot or the bullet speech, which was heralded as one of the best speeches of the day. In terms of his failures, he arguably left a toxic legacy after calling white people devils. He referred to 1963's Kennedy's assassination as chickens coming home to roost, and as part of this, he was banned from the Nation of Islam for the 90 days following this this kind of phrase. He tarnished the inclusive, peaceful messages of other civil rights leaders. He failed to influence any civil rights legislation. However, in terms of his overall impact, by alienating white people, he made Martin Luther King, seem more acceptable in comparison. And while not changing any legislation, this was not his goal, and he helped evolve the actions and roles and the sort of passion of civil rights groups, especially. And then Martin Luther King, who was around 1929 to 1968. His views and background is that he wanted non-violent protests as a means to expand civil rights, and he liked mass demonstrations. In terms of his achievements, in 1963 he created the Birmingham Campaigns movement, which ended in the changing of Birmingham's racist laws, is in Alabama, and the firing of Eugene Bill Connor, who was the chief of police at the time, who was racist. In 1955, he helped push for the Montgomery bus boycott, again in Alabama, which was successful. And in 1957, he created the Southern Church Leadership Conference, the SCLC, which used like religious morals to justify the civil rights movements. In 1963, he did the March on Washington speech, which is heralded as one of the best speeches ever. In terms of his weaknesses, the slow speed of his campaigns led to militancy by Black Power groups in the 1960s, which kind of diverted from the success of peaceful activism. His ideas were heavily inspired by Gandhi. I don't know why that's a weakness. I guess he didn't really come up with it. He didn't relate to the northern blacks in ghetto conditions who were suffering in a different way to the southern blacks that he was fighting for. He alienated Johnson, the Prime Minister, by slating America's involvement in the Vietnam War. He never fully committed to his 1966 Chicago protests, which led to their arguable failure. He failed at 1961 in Albany because Laurie Pritchett did not react to the protesters. In terms of its overall impact, despite success in the South, he did little for those in the North, and his greatest successes came after his death. A national holiday was made in his name. Alright, now for the essay, African American Civil Rights Leadership Essay. To what extent was Martin Luther King the most successful African American leader in this period? The general rules, write thematically, not chronologically, not year by year, but by type of success. Consistent links, comparisons, and connections need to be made throughout. In the introduction, set out your line of argument, briefly refer to the main criteria you will be covering in the essay, loosely refer to the situations at the start and the end of the period, and potential shifts in patterns over these years. In the paragraphs, identify a theme of success: gaining mass support, inspiring followers, gaining wide support, effective tactics, achieving aims. Give evidence that a specific person named in the title, for example, Martin Luther King, was successful in this aspect. Compare this to other leaders who failed to match his achievements in this respect. Compare to other leaders who did achieve comparative success. Concluding sentence of each paragraph needs to be a judgment, an answer to the question. New paragraph has to link to the previous paragraph. The essay has to cover the whole period, so refer to Booker T. Washington and people like Jesse Jackson. And then in your conclusion, write themes of success. Which themes of success was the named leader most successful in, and which themes of success was he least successful in. Who is more/most successful in achieving their aims, and give an overall judgment on the leader given in question. Okay.